Okay, so you guys really want to go deep on game theory, huh?
Yeah, looks like it.
Well, all right then. Let's see what we've got here. Seems like you've all sent in some pretty interesting stuff. We're talking economics, politics, even animal behavior. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I think it's worth just taking a sec to level set. I mean, what exactly is game theory?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. At its core, you can think of it as the art of strategic thinking, right? It's about understanding how people make decisions, not in a vacuum, but when their choices are intertwined with what others are doing.
So like chess or poker.
Exactly. Those are classic examples. But what's really cool about game theory is that it goes way beyond board games. Your sources, for example, they show how it applies to just about every aspect of life. You've got businesses competing for customers, politicians vying for votes, even animals battling for resources. It's all about figuring out your best move when you know everyone else is trying to do the same.
So it sounds like we're talking about like a whole new way of looking at the world, right?
Absolutely. And to really get a handle on it, I think we need to break it down a bit. Your sources point to a few key elements that make up any game. And by game, we're talking about any situation where strategic decision-making comes into play.
Okay, so what are these elements?
Well, first off, you've got the players. These are the individuals or groups or even organizations that are making the decisions. Then you've got the choices, the different actions each player can take. And of course, you've got the payoffs, the outcomes that each player receives based on the choices everyone makes.
Right. So, like, if I choose to cooperate with you and you choose to betray me, I might end up with a worse outcome than if we both cooperated.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final element, strategy. A strategy is basically a plan of action that takes into account the potential choices of all the other players. It's about figuring out what will give you the best possible outcome, given the uncertainty of what everyone else might do.
Okay, so we've got players, choices, payoffs, and strategies. But how does all this actually play out in the real world?
Well, one of the most famous examples in game theory is the prisoner's dilemma. You guys sent in a ton of stuff on this, and for good reason. It really gets to the heart of why cooperation can be so difficult, even when it's in everyone's best interest.
Right, I remember reading about this. It's about those two guys who get arrested,
Yeah.
right?
Tom and Jack.
Yeah.
The cops suspect they've committed a serious crime, but they don't have enough evidence to convict them on the big charges. So they separate Tom and Jack and offer them each a deal.
And the deal is?
Confess and rat out your buddy, and you'll go free while he gets a long sentence. But if you both stay silent, you'll both get a much lighter sentence for a lesser offense.
Okay, so what's the dilemma?
Well, think about it from Tom's perspective. If Jack stays silent, Tom's best option is to confess and go free. But if Jack confesses, Tom's best option is still to confess, because getting a moderate sentence is better than taking the fall alone and getting a long one. So no matter what Jack does, Tom's best bet is to betray him. And the same logic applies to Jack.
So even though they'd both be better off if they both stayed silent, they're both going to end up confessing and screwing each other over.
Exactly. It's a classic example of how individual self-interest can lead to a worse outcome for everyone involved.
Wow, that's pretty messed up. And I bet we see this kind of thing happening all the time, right? Like in business negotiations or even international relations.
Oh, absolutely. Think about two countries locked in an arms race. Each country feels like it needs to keep building up its weapons to deter the other, even though they'd both be safer and better off if they could just agree to disarm. It's the same logic as the prisoner's dilemma.
So how do you break out of this cycle?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. Game theory can help us understand why cooperation is so difficult, but it doesn't necessarily offer easy solutions. One key factor is trust. If Tom and Jack had complete trust in each other, they'd know they could both stay silent and get the best outcome. But in the real world, trust is often in short supply.
Right, especially when you're dealing with things like international relations or big business deals. It's like everyone's always looking out for their own interests first.
Exactly. And that's why communication is so important. If the players can talk to each other and establish some kind of agreement, they might be able to overcome the temptation to betray each other.
So it's like, even though game theory shows us that cooperation can be tough, it also gives us some clues about how to make it work better.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so valuable. It's not just about understanding why things are the way they are, but also about finding ways to improve the outcomes.
Okay, so we've talked about the prisoner's dilemma, which shows how cooperation can be difficult. But what about situations where people actually want to cooperate, but they just have different preferences?
Ah, well, that's where the battle of the sexes comes in. It's another classic example in game theory, and it illustrates a different kind of strategic challenge.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this battle of the sexes.
All right, picture this. A husband and wife are trying to decide what to do on a Friday night. The husband's a huge football fan, while the wife is really into classical music. They both want to spend the evening together, but they have different ideas about how to do it.
So what are their options?
Well, the husband could go to the football game, and the wife could go to the concert. But then they'd both be unhappy because they wouldn't be together. Or one of them could give in and go to the other person's preferred event, but then they'd be somewhat unhappy because they wouldn't be doing what they really wanted. The best outcome for both of them is to go to the same event together, but which one?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's not like the prisoner's dilemma where one choice is clearly better than the other. In this case, it really depends on what the other person does.
Right, that's the crux of the battle of the sexes. There's no dominant strategy for either player. The best choice for each person depends entirely on what they think the other person will do.
So how do they decide?
Well, in the real world, couples usually talk about it, right? They try to figure out what each other wants and find a compromise that works for both of them. But game theory offers some interesting insights into how this kind of coordination can happen even without explicit communication.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it. If the husband knows that his wife absolutely hates football, he might figure that she's more likely to go to the concert no matter what. So he'll go to the concert too, even though he'd rather be at the game because at least then he'll be with his wife.
And the wife might do the same thing, right? If she knows her husband is dead set on football, she might just suck it up and go to the game with him.
Exactly. It's all about anticipating the other person's likely behavior and making the choice that gives you the best possible outcome, given those expectations. And that's something we do all the time in our relationships, even if we don't realize it.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So game theory isn't just about competition and betrayal, it's also about cooperation and understanding.
Absolutely. It's a tool for understanding all kinds of strategic interactions, from the most cutthroat business deals to the most loving relationships.
Okay, so we've talked about these classic examples from game theory, but how does all this actually apply to the real world? Beyond hypothetical prisoners and couples arguing about Friday night plans.
Well, that's the exciting part. Your sources are full of examples of how game theory is being used to make real-world decisions in all sorts of fields. We're talking business, politics, economics, even military strategy.
Okay, give me an example. How's game theory being used in business?
Well, one of the most common applications is in pricing strategy. Let's say you're a company selling a new product. You want to set a price that's high enough to make a profit, but low enough to attract customers. But you also have to consider what your competitors are doing. If they lower their prices, you might have to lower yours too, or risk losing market share.
So it's like a constant game of chess, trying to anticipate your opponent's next move and stay one step ahead.
Exactly. And game theory provides a framework for analyzing these kinds of situations and making strategic decisions. It can help you figure out the best price to set, the best time to launch a new product, even the best way to negotiate with suppliers and distributors.
That's pretty impressive. What about politics? How's game theory being used there?
Oh man, politics is a goldmine for game theory. Think about elections. Candidates are constantly trying to figure out the best way to appeal to voters, knowing that their opponents are doing the same thing. They have to decide where to focus their resources, what issues to emphasize, and how to respond to attacks from their rivals. It's all about strategic decision-making under conditions of uncertainty.
And I bet international relations is even more complex, right?
Oh yeah, it's a whole other level. Countries are constantly interacting with each other, making decisions about trade, diplomacy, military alliances, and so on. And every decision one country makes can have ripple effects on other countries, leading to a whole cascade of strategic responses and counter-responses.
So it's like a giant game of global chess, with all these different players trying to outmaneuver each other.
Exactly. And game theory can help us understand the dynamics of this complex game, even if it can't always predict the outcome with certainty. It can shed light on things like why wars happen, why countries form alliances, and why trade agreements are so difficult to negotiate.
This is blowing my mind. I never realized how much game theory is actually used in the real world. It's like, it's everywhere.
It really is. And it's not just limited to human interactions either. Your sources also talk about how game theory can be applied to animal behavior.
Animal behavior, really?
Oh yeah. Think about two animals competing for food or territory. They each have to decide whether to fight or back down. If they both fight, they both risk getting injured. But if one backs down, the other one gets all the resources. It's a classic strategic dilemma, and game theory can help us understand how animals make these kinds of decisions.
Wow, that's amazing. So game theory isn't just about humans being all strategic and calculating. It's about how all sorts of creatures, from tiny insects to giant whales, interact with each other and make decisions in a complex world.
Absolutely. It's a fundamental principle of life itself.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the basic elements of game theory, the classic examples of the prisoner's dilemma and the battle of the sexes, and the wide-ranging applications of this framework in the real world. But what's the big takeaway for our listeners? Why should they care about all this?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that game theory gives us a powerful tool for understanding the world around us. It helps us see the hidden strategic dynamics that shape our interactions with others, whether we're talking about business, politics, relationships, or even just everyday life.
So it's like by understanding game theory, we can become better decision makers.
Exactly. By thinking strategically, by considering the incentives and likely actions of others, we can make more informed choices that lead to better outcomes. It's about being proactive, not just reactive.
That makes sense. So it's not just about understanding why things are the way they are. It's about using that knowledge to make better choices in the future.
Absolutely. And that's what makes game theory so exciting. It's not just a theoretical framework, it's a practical tool for improving our lives.
All right, so to recap, we've learned about game theory, the study of strategic decision making. We've seen how it can be applied to all sorts of situations, from prisoners' dilemmas to battles of the sexes to global politics and even animal behavior. And we've seen how it can help us make better choices in a complex world.
Hopefully, this deep dive has given you a new perspective on the world around you. Keep your eyes open, and you'll start to see game theory playing out everywhere.
Absolutely. So the next time you're facing a tough decision, think about the incentives of the other people involved. Think about the potential outcomes and try to anticipate their likely actions. You might be surprised at how much clearer the best course of action becomes.
And who knows, you might even find yourself winning the game.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into game theory. Until next time, keep thinking strategically.
And remember, the game is always on.
All right, that's it for this episode. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.